Okay, so our project is in place now, our repository is in place, our models are in place, the actual e-commerce site itself is ready, is all in place, and so we're pretty much ready to go. There's just one minor problem that makes our application break solid principles, and that is this. With any controller that we want to use a repository in, we have to define the repository and pass to it a data context. Now this causes two problems. First of all, we might want to change the concrete implementation of one of these repositories. What does that mean? Well, that means that that particular repository might want to change how it does certain things. It's always going to have the same methods, but how it handles those methods may be different. One example might be that it starts to use a different kind of data context. So for example, rather than a SQL server, it might want to connect to an Oracle server, or it might want to connect to a service out on the internet to get the products or a customer database from some external source. So if we change one of those repositories as it is at the moment, we'd have to go through every single controller that uses the repository and update it to use our new repository. So what's the way around it? Well, what we need to do is use something called dependency injection. But dependency injection requires that we use interfaces rather than concrete implementations. What is an interface? Well, an interface is a means of specifying the inputs and outputs of a particular class without providing the actual implementation. And the great thing about them is once you've created an interface, any implementation of that interface just needs to inherit that interface, and you can have multiple implementations, and provided they inherit the same interface, you can interchange them quite easily. That's probably a bit complex to understand, so the easiest way is to show it in practice. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to take our base repository and we need to extract an interface for it. So let's go into our repository base and we're going to right click on it and we're going to say refactor extract interface. By default it wants to extract everything. It's going to send it to iRepositoryBase.cs. That's all fine, so let's just say OK. So what it's done now is created us an interface, and our repository base now implements that interface. There's just one slight change I want to make here, which is I don't want the interface to be in the same project. So let's just make that public. Get that and copy it and put it in our contracts project. Say add a new folder, we'll call that repositories. Paste that in. We need to update this namespace here because the namespace is basically this here. So it's e-commerce.contracts. Oops. Yeah, contracts.repositories. Save that off. So that's our interface there where we want it to be, and we'll just open that back up from there. We need to delete the original one. Okay. So that now cannot find it. So we need to, in our DAL, add a reference to the contracts. Yep, there we go. So we want to just build that, and we'll just add that in here actually. So I'm just going to manually add in this using statement. Whoops. Repositories. Okay, so that's now picking that up. So what that's saying is that the repository base entity is going to implement iRepository base. Now what that means is here we define all the properties and all the methods that any class that implements this interface must also implement. So for example, if we go in and take the get by ID out, let's just comment that code out and then try to build it, it's going to complain because it's saying it doesn't interface the get by ID. So if we take that out, put that back in and rebuild, and now it's happy again. Now why is that important? Well, why that is important is because rather than instantiating a concrete customer repository, instead we can create an I repository customer. Oops. Just add these to our project. So it's a repository base. That's better. Let's just take that out. Customers equals new. Oops. Customer repository. New data context. So now you can see we can still access all these items, but it's by referencing an interface rather than the concrete implementation. So we're nearly there with a bit better abstraction, but as you can see, the problem is we're still implementing the concrete repository there. So what we really need to do is take that out completely, and what we want to do is inject that concrete implementation into the controller instead, and I will show you how to do that in the next section on dependency injection.